his heart is probably still like racing a little bit from that one. So our next panel is a bit of a question. Bitcoin, stablecoins, CBDCs. Which should businesses and citizens prefer?
I think my answer is obvious. The next panel is going to be moderated by Stacey Herbert, founder at El Dante Capital. Please give her a very warm welcome. I feel like everybody has a little bit of insight into my every night at dinner. It's kind of like what you just saw. We're going to welcome onto the stage, again, Max Kaiser, my husband. You saw a little preview of what it's like to live with him. Next up, Max, you're supposed to sit here. Look, that's you. Okay. Next up, Paolo Ordoino, the organizer of this event. It's another toxic Bitcoin maximalist right here, Sensimo, architect. Who is with Galloy and of course Bitcoin Beach Wallet. He's another great Bitcoin conference. Now, first of all, Paolo, I know you have organized this whole event, and it says Bitcoin, stablecoins, CBDCs. Why is there no representative of CBDCs? Like Klaus Schwab lives just 2 hours away. Why didn't you invite him to come defend?
Well, we want to talk about CBDCs in a more global way, in a more objective way. So I'm not sure if we would have got objectiveness from him.
Actually, let's first talk about CBDCs, because obviously nobody here is going to say that people should prefer CBDCs. Nobody in the audience is going to believe that. But after 2 years of lockdowns and what we witnessed in America, it's quite clear that a lot of people like a lot of free money sent to them and working from home and free money. So let's start at the end with Nicholas. Like, what do you think with CBDCs? Don't you think that the majority of the population will actually like free money distributed to them?
I mean, it's what happened in a lot of countries with hyperinflation. At the beginning, you have your free money, it's good, it's like a good drug, and you're happy about it. And then, like every drug, probably, at some point you start to want more and more, up to a point where you cannot live without it, and suddenly you have hyperinflation. So, yeah, I guess it's one of the challenges, right? People like free money, but they don't necessarily see the long-term implication of receiving a free check in the pocket.
So, I mean, obviously, a Venezuelan will see the dangers of this sort of CBDC. But in America, because it is the reserve currency, nobody has really seen the harm that the Venezuelan sort of responds to it. But Samson, what do you think of this in terms of, Canada, you received a lot of free money as well, and you saw that people like it, right? And they feel like it's sustainable.
Well, I'll say maybe it's controversial, but CBDCs could be a good thing.
Uh-oh.
If implemented correctly. So there's a caveat there. So I was originally thinking there's the potential that we would have a good CBDC because the technology all exists already. You have liquid and confidential transactions, you have Chaumian settlements. So theoretically, a government could create a bearer cash type CBDC, which has the same properties as physical cash. The problem is they don't want that, right? So that's where the trap lies in CBDCs. And the Bank of Canada had a job posting before saying we're hiring researchers to research a CBDC. And that already is a red flag because there already is open source technology. Yesterday you announced Terra Credit, right? That could be used also as a base layer for a CBDC. But they're not interested in that. They want to create something that is surveillable and controllable. So in their job posting, they said, we want it to be private, but not too private. And there lies the problem with CBDCs. So it's not that CBDCs are bad, it's that they're being implemented in a bad way.
Is this going viral yet on Twitter that Samson's just come out as a CBDC supporter? I mean, what's the difference between a CBDC and a stablecoin?
So CBDCs are government issued, and stablecoins are private companies, right, that are issuing stablecoins. So I think that when we think about CBDCs, I agree that there is an aspect that we. So yesterday I was preaching that the entire banking system is based and is kept together by rubber bands, right? So we're running on 30 years old, 40 years old technologies, and it's one of the reasons why banking is so expensive to maintain, right? Because every year more rubber bands. But what if we can fast forward the technology that they're using and use any type of new peer-to-peer distribution layer for the fiat money, right? That could be a good improvement. But as Samson says, there is a risk of a dystopian or Orwellian future where there is a mass control over people, right? So one of the interesting things to think about is that now if you, for example, pay with your credit card for coffee, you use Tether, the government will not know about it, right? So it's only your bank that will know about it, or you will know that a certain blockchain transaction refers to buying a coffee. But with a CBDC, you can have the government knowing exactly every single move that you make. And that is the big difference, right? So if we today don't have a government that can see every single payment, as small as even the smallest ones, and they just rely on reporting. And the thing that is, to me, really important is that some people at least, and some media, try to basically pass the message that you shouldn't have, if you don't have anything to hide, you shouldn't be afraid of a CBDC that can give full oversight to governments on each transfer. But the problem is that it's not about not having anything to hide. If you start relinquishing your right to privacy, you are, as a human being, you have the right to have access to privacy, right? So otherwise, if you fall into the argument of saying, yes, I don't have anything to hide, so the government can see everything that I'm paying. What if then, the government can install a microphone in your house, right? You don't have anything to hide, so why not a microphone in your house, or having access to the photos of your kids, right? So if you start moving the line, the more you move the line, then you give up more and more freedom, right, to the government. It's not about hiding something, it's about preserving your freedom. So I think that also in the US, if I just finish the rant, in the US there was a couple of senators that are actually trying to pass a bill to block the government to issue a CBDC, because also then they realized how problematic can be. So I think that stablecoins can, for the moment, provide an alternative that still have the access to dollars in areas of the world that need access to the dollar. But on the other side, it tries to maintain the separation that exists today between the government and money.
Right, and it's not even just something to hide. It's like we've seen over the past decade, like radical shift in what the elites think about the definition of words. So like the fact that your digital data is online and that you had a bad thought 10 years ago, which is now a bad thought but wasn't a bad thought back then, and they deplatform you. They could pull you as well off the financial grid. Max, ideas like negative interest rates used to be unheard of when you were on Wall Street. The CBDCs, one of the stated ambitions of it is this sort of thing, is they could just take your money if you're not being a good consumer citizen.
Yeah, it depends on how you think economies develop. Do they develop on the ground with people interchanging with each other and trading with each other? Or do they develop at the top with bureaucrats figuring out how people should interact with each other? And we know quite simply that the way economies grow, it's on grassroots levels, people exchanging with each other. Democrats are given greater tools to control from the top down the quote-unquote money, you will have things like money that with an expiration date, like frequent flyer miles. So you'll get your paycheck, it'll be a CBDC, and it'll be you have to spend this money within 9 months or it expires. It's not good anymore. So this will be a way to stimulate what will come under the rubric of aggregate demand, which is a great Keynesian concept. We need to stimulate demand. We're going to stimulate demand by printing money, and we're going to play with the money, and we're going to psychologically motivate people to do things with their money. And of course, it's dead on arrival and can't possibly work. It's never worked and never can work. But it doesn't stop people who use fiat money to gain political influence from then going back and trying to game the financial system to create more political influence. So that's the vicious loop that we're in. The good news is that CBDCs will fail.
Right. So, now, both Nicholas and Paolo, you have stablecoins. You have different versions of stablecoin. And obviously, everybody here is a Bitcoiner, so we all know that we want to hold Bitcoin. But in a world, in terms of where we're trying to spread adoption, and you can spend a shitcoin instead, like the US dollar, or a stable coin backed by the US dollar. So, like, do you think that harms adoption? I've heard this argument many times on Twitter, like, do stable coins prevent adoption of Bitcoin?
Yeah, maybe I can tell you the story of the Bitcoin Beach Wallet very quickly. So, the project started 2 years ago with the idea to create a Bitcoin circular economy in Exante. And the very first version of the wallet was Bitcoin only, because the idea is to create a circular economy, so why don't you need dollar, right? And so there was no dollar whatsoever in the wallet. And the very first feedback that I got when I was building the wallet is that, but I need to pay my coffee for like $4. I don't know how many cents I should pay. So there need to be a conversion system somehow in the wallet so that like, okay, $4 is 10,000 sats. I put $4 and I receive that, right? And this was the first update that I did on the wallet to have dollar in terms of unit of account with display currency. And then people were happy, they could say, okay, I have Bitcoin, but I can pay for my goods and services. Because the reality is today, even in El Salvador after the law was passed, like the goods and services are still priced in dollar, and probably until we achieve hyper-Bitcoinization, the goods and services will be priced in dollar. But now we introduce a new problem because, okay, people say, okay, this is a great wallet, like I can download it, I can use it, it's very user-friendly, and like I receive dollar, right? Like I'm being paid for my coffee, I receive $4. And maybe a week after they open like the wallet, maybe they have $4.50 and okay, I get 50 cents, great, I'm happy, it's a great wallet, it gives me free money. And maybe a month later, it's like $3, and now they think, okay, why? What's happened? Like maybe this thing doesn't, is a scam or something. And basically the idea is that when we introduce Bitcoin in Exante, the idea is that we use Bitcoin as currency, right, as a medium of exchange, and not necessarily at the beginning as a store of value. And it's very different if you go to, you go to Bitfinex and you wire US dollar and you buy Bitcoin with it. You know you're buying Bitcoin for an investment, and you expect the investment to change in value compared to dollar. It might go up, it might go down, but there is this expectation that okay, the value will change over time. When you receive currency, you're not necessarily used to the fact that, okay, I receive $4, but maybe this value will change. And actually, that's not necessarily a property we want out of money, because the reality is that if your expenses are in dollar and your revenue are in Bitcoin, then there is a mismatch, right? You have liability in one currency, and assets in another currency, and you're actually gambling without knowing it. And if the price goes up, that's great. But if the price goes down, you might go out of business just because you are not hedged. And so I think the reality that we wanted, and we still want, right, to get to hyper-Bitcoinization and people to price everything in Bitcoin. but probably until the day we have like supply, oil price in Bitcoin, and the world is functioning in Bitcoin, there is a transition to hyper-Bitcoinization where we need to have a hedging system. And this is where stablecoin come into the picture. We have developed something similar called stable sats. The idea is that we want to be able to use Bitcoin as a payment system, and specifically Lightning for its property of being a payment system that is instant, and it's perfect for paying like coffee. But we need some system to say that, okay, I should be able to hedge whenever I need to, and not be subject to the volatility of Bitcoin. Right? And as I get more educated about Bitcoin and understand, okay, over time it's good to be subject to the volatility of Bitcoin, because this is the only way we can achieve hyper-Bitcoinization. But maybe if for my next 3 months I have, this expense I need to make, maybe I shouldn't be in Bitcoin, I should be in fiat equivalent for my expenses.
So Paolo, obviously everybody knows Tether is the first stablecoin. When it was first introduced, there was a problem that doesn't really exist anymore, which was that huge arbitrage between the various exchanges and the prices, and that was a part of the legacy banking system that took so long. That's now over. But so what do you think about this, the Tether, the role of Tether in developing nations, in places like Venezuela, in Latin America, in terms of the adoption and helping exactly what Nicholas is describing there?
Yeah, well, Tether has created entire industry of stablecoins, right? So, well, you might have to thank us also for the CBDCs, because they got our idea, right? But the reality is that Tether, from crypto trading, started as a crypto trading settlement system, and in the last 3-4 years moved really quickly to be actually the currency, or one of the most used currencies in developing countries and emerging markets. So, as much as we all love Bitcoin in Tether and in Phoenix, so the reality is that there are jurisdictions, there are nations that have a more imminent need, that is protecting from the high devaluation pace of their national currency. For example, in Turkey, the Turkish lira lost 80% year to year of value compared to the dollar. Same thing happens in Argentina and in many other nations. So these people that live in these countries, it's not that they don't have time to think about, okay, Bitcoin long-term, freedom and so on. They want to go to the immediate solution that helps them to protect their wealth, right? So they don't want to invest. That is not about investment, that is not about speculation, and they really, they are living, a normal life. They are not educated yet on Bitcoin, so they just need to protect themselves and their families. So they see the dollar as like their reserve currency, and at least doing a little bit better than, or quite much better than their national currencies. So they use Tether as a way to save their money. So I think that in the future, the more the time will pass, I think that the growth of the installed monetary base of Bitcoin will keep growing. We are going to see a shift, from dollars to Bitcoin, and that will be faster than we have seen today. So I see Tether as actually a really good advocate for Bitcoin, right? So the thing that I always say is that Tether is a centralized stablecoin, so it's centralized dollars, because we use the banking system, of course, and running on a decentralized transport layer. So it shouldn't be confused with Bitcoin, right? So only Bitcoin has the properties of Bitcoin, while stablecoins are just basically dollar with with lipstick, right? So to me, is this an important message, and I'm really grateful that with the work of Tether, actually we are on one side we are providing, of course, access to dollars, but on the other side we are probably one of the biggest companies providing support to Bitcoin, right? So our focus, our investments are widely focused on Bitcoin.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to turn to you.
Okay. So Paulo basically is a makeup artist for the US dollar, putting lipstick on the pig.
Yes.
Right. But I wanted to address your question, Stacey.
Yeah.
Like, what is the relationship between Bitcoin and stablecoins like Tether? And I think in the global south, in the developing world, in LATAM, there is a natural draw to the dollar. People are seeking out dollar-denominated value, and Tether usually is what they're looking for, because Tether is the king of the stablecoins. So I think there is a way for us to use the draw and the attraction of stablecoins to onboard more people into Bitcoin. And I'll just show what we're working on. So we're building Aqua. It's meant to be a Bitcoin and Tether wallet. So in one view, you see Bitcoin, that's your savings account, and then you have Tether and Lightning as your checking account. So that's the goal, that we can leapfrog more people into Bitcoin because they want stablecoins, they want Tether, they want dollars.
Well, but this is the argument I hear all the time against it, mostly from Europeans or Americans. It's like, for Latin America, if you have a stable coin, if you have Tether in El Salvador or Mexico or anywhere, that they're not going to adopt Bitcoin, they're not going to convert them. I mean, it's important to understand that Latin American countries have been so fucked by the US in terms of the economic situation that so many of their populations live in America and remit in dollars. So they're already like, it's very attached to the dollar. But do you think it would harm adoption of Bitcoin for them to?
Not really, because you can't hit people on the head with a hammer and say, take Bitcoin only.
Yeah.
We have the luxury of that because we're hooked into the banking system. It's not hard for you or Max or Paolo to get a bank account and a credit card or a debit card. But there are people in the world that don't have that, unbanked. So for the unbanked, Tether is excellent for them. They just need a phone, and then they have dollars. And the other thing to remember too is a lot of these people cannot actually convert their home currency or a peso into dollars. It's not allowed, or there are strict limits on that. So this is where Tether comes into play. It's a tool of freedom. You can have dollars, and you can have Bitcoin. But I think there's going to be a natural progression where people will seek stable coins, seek dollar-denominated value, and then they'll see, okay, there's this big thing at the top, Bitcoin. Maybe I can swap into that or shift into that. But we don't need to force them into it. We can show them, here's dollars and here's Bitcoin.
Max, what do you think?
Well, Tether addresses a problem in that the banking system is one very clunky financial plumbing that's been built up over years with a lot of jurisdictional issues and compatibility issues, latency issues. So Tether simply gets rid of the need to go through all that archaic plumbing system, and it's a great on-ramp and off-ramp. And to the extent that people are converting their fiat money into Tether, they're taking a step toward, a step away from fiat money, which is an important step to take. From that pool of capital, a lot of it will go into Bitcoin. And so I don't think it interrupts adoption at all. It's anything that points people away from the current system and the fiat money system is going to help Bitcoin.
I might add, you said it's easy for all of us to get bank accounts, but talk to any Americans who have to travel outside of America. It's like they're shutting off. Nobody wants to deal with Americans. So Tether might be our only option to remain banked around the world, right? Because who wants to deal with Americans? So
Tether on liquid.
Tether on liquid would allow us. Right. So the other thing is Bitcoin. Let's talk about Bitcoin. So Samson, your mission with Gen 3 is, hyper-Bitcoinization, to bring it to these other nations. We don't have shitcoins on this list, but the issue with bringing Bitcoin to these developing nations, is it easier to just go there and bring them Tether first, or a stable coin first, rather than Bitcoin?
Oh, it depends. I think they will welcome Tether. Like, it's a dollar-denominated value. And I think, for example, let's take El Salvador. They launched Chico because they realized people do need dollar-denominated values. So there is a place for it, and potentially people might adopt Tether. Like, I think the government in exile of Myanmar adopted Tether as their currency.
What?
Well, that's a big step, because they're not able to operate. They're operating in Excel. So for them, they need a currency, and I think there are a lot of people there that do use Tether. So that's definitely a step. But our main focus is talking to people about Bitcoin. But definitely, Tether is an instrument in that tool set.
I think it's interesting to look at El Salvador, right? If you think about it, El Salvador went to have their own currency, which they gave up 20 years ago because of inflation, and they moved to the dollar, and eventually they moved to Bitcoin. And it's probably for many countries that are experiencing hyperinflation, assuming the governments understand that hyperinflation is bad for the citizen and they want good thing for the citizen, they will reach out to a better option. Of course, going from your local hyperinflated currency to the US dollar to something like Tether is a lower step compared to just jump to Bitcoin. And if you remember what El Salvador did, this is effectively what they did, right? Long before Bitcoin was created, but 20 years ago, okay, they give up their currency, they adopt the currency of another nation. And at this point, it's interesting to think about their incentive because, okay, they no longer have a printing price, and therefore they're less, to say, okay, Bitcoin is bad because, it's like we don't control it, we cannot print more of it if, we did, because they already use someone else's currency. They use the United States currency. So I don't know how many countries will jump directly to Bitcoin, or how many countries will say, okay, maybe what we have, is definitively doesn't work, and our country is in chaos. We need, and because of currency, we need something else. Where we need to replace maybe with USDT, and then it's a step toward Bitcoin. I'm not sure, but something that is for sure is that whether the country controls their own currency or not will be a big discussion point toward, okay, it doesn't work, we have hyperinflation, but if they have their own currency, they still have a printing price, right? And for a government, it's something that it's hard for them to give up.
One of the things about the stablecoins, as I'm listening to your French accent, I remember being in Europe when the euro was introduced, and the French in particular were very suspicious of this, and you had the French franc price for years afterwards, next to the euro, so the population can learn to okay, now I know they're converting between the new currency and the old one that they were familiar with. What about the most stable coin of them all throughout history, which is gold? Because you have Tether Gold as well.
Yeah, I think that Tether Gold can be seen as an evolution of stablecoins, because I think it's going back to when actually national currencies were linked to the gold. In that way, you could argue that now we are seeing how the dollar in the last 2 years, more than I think 38% of the dollars has been issued within the last 2 years, and that's something that's also the reason why US and all the other countries moved away from issuing money, issuing fiat against a gold balance, because that was kind of scary. They couldn't print out of thin air, right, or based on some formula based on their economy and so on, right? So they did this step in order to be free in the process of issuing new money. And I think that Tether Gold and gold stablecoins are kind of bringing back the rationality of money, right? So gold has properties like Bitcoin, so is scarce. They said that more than 90% of the gold that is on Earth, apart from the one in the deep seas, that can be extracted, has already been extracted, right? Apart if an asteroid will hit us with a ton of gold on top, then that's basically all the gold that we can have. And so, and also it's difficult to extract, a little bit like Bitcoin. The beauty of Bitcoin is just that it makes it extremely straightforward, it's digital, so it's transportable, is without doubts is a fixed supply, right? So there's still a little bit, some uncertainty on the total supply of gold, of course, right? So there are differences there, and Bitcoin is extremely superior on many point of views, but gold is a natural alternative, is what has been used for thousands of years from humanity. And I think that one of the interesting things, right? Still always thinking about emerging markets, developing countries, right? We, also, I'm Italian. Italians have been always used to, have a small stash of gold, jewels, throughout the history, because in the worst case scenario with wars or crazy things that happen, is the thing that you can take with you always and will always be accepted everywhere in the world, right? So what we are doing with Tether Gold is that we are actually tokenizing physical gold, right? Tether Gold is fully backed by 100% by physical gold that is stored in Switzerland. I'm not sure how many of you know that Switzerland is actually the main producer of gold bars, right? More than 80% of the gold bars in the world are actually produced in Switzerland and has the safest vaults ever. Right? So we choose Switzerland to store the gold that is backed in Tether Gold. And it's basically a tokenized version of the gold. And the beauty of it is that customers can redeem Tether Gold for physical gold. So now you can come to us, come to tether.to website, and if you have a certain amount of ounces, you can come and get delivered your gold bar. So that's a unique product, and because we realize that gold at least is not subject to control of governments, right? So it's important in a way we want to give back to people the freedom that they should have had in the first place. And also gold is global, right? So it's globally recognized, right? So there is no doubt that it's the king of commodities, is the king has been the king of currencies for forever. So I think that more and more, when I think about, there is this discussion with Bitcoiners where, people think, okay, gold is bad and the Bitcoin is better, right? Creating Tether Gold, we never meant to say, okay, this is an alternative to Bitcoin, right? To us, is an alternative to the dollar. So Tether Gold is not compare itself with Bitcoin, but is actually the currency to me where people, if they want to sell temporarily part of their Bitcoin because they want to diversify their portfolio, they could use in order to have a more solid, let's say, stable coin, rather than going to the dollar, because the supply of the dollar, it can, as we have seen, as I said, can quickly change and has changed a lot over the recent years.
But the most important thing that you left out was on February 26th, $630 billion worth of US treasuries were stolen, seized, confiscated back from Russia by the United States, which was a seismic event. I think in history in 20, 30 years from now, we'll look back at that moment and think like, holy shit, they just blew up their money. Like they removed it as a layer one money. So Max, what do you think of this argument of Tether Gold as an alternative to treasuries in this sort of period of deglobalization and whatever comes next?
Well, gold is the poor man's Bitcoin. And Tether Gold is, I think, going to be a really big product going forward as gold probably becomes more of a factor as the global economy continues to melt down and we have something like a Bretton Woods 2, some kind of global confab where governments are trying to re-architect the global currency grid, and they always come back to gold. And a fast way for countries and large high net worth individuals, corporations to get exposure to gold would be through Tether Gold, as long as the story. The problem with gold, of course, is that it has the problem of verification. Which,
and it's heavy.
It's also heavy, but the verification problem is one that doesn't go away, that is absent with Bitcoin. With Bitcoin, the transaction is the verification. So they merge, that's why you can build an entire stack of securities notes on top of Bitcoin and get rid of all the bureaucracy of the securities industry as they're doing in El Salvador. So I think the Tether Gold will find some traction as these countries and large players who are not yet ready for Bitcoin, but they need that inflation hedge. They will go to traditional gold, Tether Gold, then it will be available, and then that's a gateway drug to Bitcoin. I think as gold becomes harder to source, because it's not that easy, as you point out, it's hard to transport, there's not that much around. I think once the demand for gold picks up, there will be less sellers. I think you'll see some difficulty in pricing, and so therefore, a lot of people will go to a substitute, which will be Bitcoin. So this gold and Bitcoin have this interesting relationship. But I think Tether Gold really fits into the mix going forward as another surrogate product that works in between the existence of these major markets to assist people in bypassing the legacy system, which are archaic and no longer fit for purpose.
Well, I think we all, Samson.
Oh, Peter Schiff just sent me a DM. Said Paul was awesome. Need to talk.
You figured that.
Yeah.
But he's thinking it.
Peter Schiff thinks she's got the scepter from his bag.
Did they let him out of Puerto Rico yet?
Well, you know, the thing is, like David Graeber actually made a good argument through looking back at 5,000 years of the history of debt, is that it's during periods like this of rapid deglobalization, like everybody could see that we're going through that. We could see the sanctions against the biggest commodities producer in the world. Whatever's happening now between the U.S. and China is something's coming, right?
Okay, well, thank you very much.
This
I
is the sort of
appreciate it.
period that
I don't
throughout
want to single out
history,
Japan.
1,000 years,
I don't want to single out
everybody's
Saudi
trying to
Arabia, but
gold
these,
because there's no longer trust between nations and individuals, and you don't know, like, if you're right now for a situation with China, for example, like suddenly if you need microchips or semiconductor chips, like it might not be there tomorrow, right? Like, so in that sort of era that gold becomes very prominent. But what do you think at the end, like Nicholas, what do you think in terms of this notion of Tether Gold as a stable coin?
I think Paolo put it very well to say that Tether Gold is not an alternative to Bitcoin, it's an alternative to the US dollar. And I think that when we see a lot of countries, for some reason they don't see the writing on the wall and they say, okay, we should go back to use gold as a world without currency.
Yeah.
If enough countries think that, there might be some coalition that say, okay, we'll be using gold and maybe stop using the US dollar. The reason I think actually gold is not the answer is because from history we know that eventually when people they don't use physical gold, right? They use either bills that represent a unit of gold or Tether Gold as an alternative. The challenge here is, the supply, like how do you know that the gold is backed? And so I see that as a good stop-back solution to maybe, okay, it's similar to, okay, maybe I'm not using the US dollar anymore, I'm using a crypto dollar, I'm using USDT, and then I'm learning about the property, about how does this blockchain things is working, and I learn about managing private key and how to onboard into this ecosystem. Then I'm one step closer to be able to understand Bitcoin because I have less things to learn. I already understand how this works. But that said, I think Tether Gold is like a short-term gap. It's like USDT. We need that. We need this type of solution to achieve hyper-optimization. But eventually, I think we need to understand that the property of Bitcoin are superior to gold in many ways. One of the key properties is that because I can have my own key for it, I don't need to trust the custodian, right? This is what makes Bitcoin very unique. Eventually, I think Bitcoin is really what it should be.
So I guess in the last 4 minutes here, let's give everybody a minute to, the question here is Bitcoin, stablecoins, CBDCs, which should businesses and citizens prefer? So, Samson, let's start with you.
I want to chime in on the gold stuff too.
Okay.
Everyone talked about gold, I didn't get a chance.
Okay,
But,
wait, you chimed in with Peter Schiff. I didn't know you guys were friends, and I didn't know you were a CBDC fan. I didn't know all of this stuff about you.
So, right now you're alluding to the freezing of the Russian foreign currency reserves, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And that is actually the same problem you have with gold. So I think it was Venezuela that stored their gold with the Bank of England. And when they said, give us back our gold, Bank of England says, nah, you can't have it, right?
Yeah.
But it's the same risk. So I think if countries were to use Tether Gold, they would offset some of that risk because it is stored in Switzerland. It's done by private enterprise, not by a central bank, which is politically connected and very much influenced by the politics of the world. So you have this kind of impartiality, Swiss neutrality. And I think if you're trading paper gold, it's defective. There are a lot of people like Peter Schiff that are theorizing that they're using paper gold to suppress the price of gold because gold should be shooting through the moon right now, theoretically, but it's not. But with Tether Gold, you are tokenizing each gold bar. I know because we talked about issuing Tether Gold on liquid, hint, nudge, nudge. But you're actually referencing a single gold bar, right? Each token corresponds to a gold bar. The paper markets are not even trying to do that, right? It's just all obfuscated. So I think it's a superior product in that regard, and people can actually redeem. So you can buy Tether Gold, come to Switzerland, take it out, move it to your own vault. And that is something that no one has done before yet. So I think it's a very interesting product, and if I was a nation state, I would adopt it, because you also have liquidity. The traditional gold markets are pretty illiquid. Remember when nickel prices were, I forgot what they were spiking, right? They just said, can you stop trading now, metallic style, right? I don't think Bitfinex would say, can you stop trading gold, right? So that it offsets a number of risks, so I think it's a superior product. But that's my Tether Gold shilling. What was the other question?
The question right here, which should businesses and citizens prefer? A Bitcoin, stablecoin, CBDCs. Obviously, we all say Bitcoin, right?
Bitcoin. But I would say if I was a nation state or a central bank, I would not push a CBDC. I would just use Tether. You already have the network effect. Like Tether is used globally, and having traveled around, you see that. Like I was in Turkey and I met this OTC trader, and he was just selling Bitcoin in Tether, and I asked him like, well, what about USDC? He didn't know what it was, but Tether is just globally adopted. So if you have this money that's adopted this format, why not just support it, right? I mean, Tether is basically the biggest supporter of the US dollar. It's exporting US dollar power around the world. So I would just use that.
So you're the only thing propping up the US at this point?
Yeah, powerful. It's ironic, isn't it?
God, we're learning a lot about Bitcoiners here on stage today.
We love gold and we love dollars.
Max, I see you're writing down something. Final thoughts here.
Yeah, well, all of the negatives of Bitcoin are falling. And one of the negatives was volatility. People were saying, hey, it's too volatile. But over the past few months, we're seeing Bitcoin is now less volatile than stocks, bonds, and a lot of other currencies. So the volatility is no longer becoming an issue either. So all of the barriers that people have to get into Bitcoin are falling, and this will continue because it's perfect money. Clearly nothing competes with Bitcoin.
It'll be the ultimate stablecoin one day.
Right, when it hit hyper-Bitcoinization, it becomes a unit of account. Everything's priced in Bitcoin, and we'll be free.
Okay, well, we have 5 seconds left.
Forwards, checking accounts, fiat, saving accounts, your Bitcoin.
What he said.
Exactly. Okay, thank you very much. And,